I just want to say how humbled and honored I am to be in front of you, and I don't take this for granted. I'm really privileged to be sharing any ideas with you and thoughts with you. In thinking about this question, the first thing that came to my mind is that this is a priority moment, an opportune moment to rethink what we mean by the term community. So my tendency when I do these collective conversations is I look at the questions that are formulated for us, which are always really thoughtful. I shouldn't say that. Most of the time, they're really thoughtful. These were very thoughtful. And what I like to do is maybe rethink some of the key terms that are presented in the question to ask ourselves collectively about whether some of those key terms might need some revisiting, some collective rethinking, maybe some argumentation and debate. I think the term community needs to be seriously rethought in this moment. I think there's a real necessity for that. I think we need to, and this is what I'll say, I think we need to continue to think, as we talked about Grace Lee Boggs just a few minutes ago, right? We think about community as a verb. Community is a verb. The problem of current movements, current organizing, for that matter, much current scholarly and academic work, is that notions of community are taken for granted as categories, almost as nouns, as if they're static things. The entire nonprofit industrial complex is fucking premised on that, right? That's why communities, even within what we call AAPI, get pitched in contestation with each other and against each other, you know? And that's because the notion of community gets turned into an entrepreneurial practice, you know? It gets turned into a funding stream. Shit, sometimes it gets turned into electoral politics. And so I think we need to challenge that. We need to think about community as a verb. And when I say that, what I mean is to participate in community projects means that you rethink whose community you're part of, how you're doing the work of service, and more importantly, what militancy within that community means. So I think about abolitionist community. It's an ongoing militant experimentation and confrontation and in tactical and strategic destruction of relations of domination and power. That's what abolitionist community is. It means you do shit, right? You experiment, you fail. You know what I mean? But most of all, you take joy in what you do. You love on people that are part of this. And then you enjoy and celebrate when the community crystallizes in its militancy. So there's abolitionist community. You know, I think we need to think about that. We need to think about, you know, disability justice community. You know, something which as somebody who is ableist as anybody else, it's a community that I've been generously invited into, and I struggle to figure out how I can be joined with that community. Think about trans abolitionist community in particular, a community of abolitionist thinkers and workers and organizers that I've been in conversation and in rooms with and in organizing projects with for a number of years, forced me to totally rethink what abolition means in relation to centering trans people and trans being and trans existence. And then the last thing I'll say about that is that if we're able to do that work, to think about community as a verb, as a practice, as an ongoing experiment that is open to failure, but which also needs to be celebrated in the moments we convene it, like now, like this, right? This is community as verb right here. Then I think it allows us to rethink the other part of the question, which is, you know, the social, economic, political context we're in. It's fucking war. I mean, it's an ongoing, low to high intensity condition of domestic war. We know about the global war, I think, for the most part. Like, people acknowledge that. I think what gets under-acknowledged, under-thought, under-theorized, in fact, kind of miscast, are the conditions of domestic war that surround us, especially in places like the Bay Area. And when I say domestic war, I don't just mean what the police do. I'm not just talking about what the military does, although my colleagues here will speak to that. I'm talking about the low-intensity forms of counterinsurgency that attempt to blunt, destroy, and pacify, that is to domesticate radical and potentially radical organizations, communities, and movements. And I can talk about that more, but like, there's different ways that happens, but it's a state of war. I think we need to think about it that way, and we need to rethink how we think and do community.
So much. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Round of applause, please. Yes. um, we're gonna hand it off to Kavita. Take it away.
That's gonna be. Hey, can you hear me? Oh, hey, good morning, y'all. I say y'all like I'm from the South. I'm from Jersey. Through and through. Thank you so much for having me here and forgive my voice. No, I was not drinking last night. Yes, I am on antibiotics. Thank God I have a mask on. So when Connie called me and she was like, contextualize the fuckery, I was like, there's lots of fuckery. There's so much fuckery right now. How much time do we have to contextualize the fuckery? And she's like, listen. So Saki for South Asian Women, we work with survivors of gender-based violence from the South Asian diaspora, primarily in New York City. And I'm just gonna walk through the cascade of trauma just in the last 5 years that we've been absorbing, dealing with, that you all are fully aware of, but I'm just gonna stack it up for you. The Trump administration, which was really not that long ago, which is still very much felt today and very real today. Um, the impact of the Muslim ban, the impact of putting babies in cages, the impact of denial of asylum seekers in the United States, the impact of transphobic laws, the impact of loosening gun control, all are impacting survivors today. And this was under the administration. COVID-19 hits our community, and in New York, we were in the epicenter of the epicenter for quite a while. And the survivors that we worked with were directly impacted by COVID. So much so that, you know, many of the survivors, especially those who were undocumented, didn't feel comfortable going to the hospital to get care, didn't have access to food, didn't have access to stable housing. There were more intense forms of violence, particularly forms of sexual violence happening in our community, where we had to step in, provide private transportation, provide immediate food security, provide a lifeline to community because there was no other trusted option. That felt so real. The trauma from that experience is still felt today. The economic impact of COVID is still felt today. Layered on top of COVID, we had Hurricane Ida, which, interestingly enough, the intersection of climate justice and gender justice is so real. Many of the survivors that we work with live in basement apartments. This is going to happen across the country. This is going to happen globally. It's the working class, it's the working poor. It is primarily individuals who are the most marginalized that will be impacted by climate injustice. And we're seeing that at the work we do at Saki. And then layered on top of that, let's not even talk about this year. Let's not talk about June 24th, but we have to talk about June 24th. The fall of Roe and how that is impacting our community is so real. Indian American women in particular in New York City have the highest rates of abortion in New York City than any other Asian American community. We are now on calls across the country trying to figure out how to fund abortions for those impacted in southern states. Layered on top of all of that, there were 3 deaths in the community in the course of 3 months. August, September, and October. July, August, and September. It's a direct result of gun violence. It's a direct result of systemic abuse that's happening within our community. 48% of South Asians have said that they have experienced some form of gender-based violence through the course of their life. 48% of a population in this country. It is what we know is that it is pervasive throughout our community. And to go back to where we started, the fuckery is real. The trauma that lives in our community is so real. And that's the stuff that we're working through every single day. What I have to imagine, though, is a moment of hope. And that's where I think we need to continue to frame our work. We need to constantly think about power building, coalition building, about community building. I love what you said, Dylan, about community building being a verb. I mean, that is so real. So for us, it is about at the local level, what are other culturally specific GBV orgs that are doing this work with communities of color that we can learn from, that we can work in sync with? And like Saki is very much thinking about that work, doing that work strategically at the grassroots level and at the policy level. Because we know if we continue to function in a silo, we will not be able to make an impact. At the national level, it is about organizing. It is about organizing all of the South Asian survivor organizations across the country to mobilize our power to effectuate change, because that is the only way we're ever going to just move shit. So that's where we stand with the fuckery right now.
Thank you. That was so powerful. And moving on to Stella. Take it away.
Um, I thought I knew what I wanted to say until I just listened to Dylan and Kavita share. So I have been the executive director of Epic for all of 2 months now, and I am transitioning into this role after being a public school educator. My last 3 years, and during the pandemic, I served in a school in downtown Los Angeles. Um, and I have to say, teaching has never been easy, but in the last few years, teaching is one of those places where he talks about warfare. It was, as a union leader and a classroom educator, it was non-stop warfare. All 10 years in the classroom, warfare. Forget about what I woke up every morning to do, which was teach theater and do silly stuff with my teenagers and just make sure they had a safe space to be every day. Like, that's really what I signed for. And I spent more of my time outside of the classroom in arguments and meetings with our superintendents, at union meetings, fighting for basic necessities. Um, fighting for the things my students were asking for and being told, no, they don't deserve access to a theater. No, they don't deserve access to ethnic studies. No, they don't deserve whatever it is they were asking. I mean, so much so at one point, my kids and I were banned from performing Shakespeare. Just flat out a ban from doing Shakespeare because our version was too gay. That's what it was, just too gay. Can't do it. Stop it. What are you doing? Um, it got to the point where I was doing so bad that my students held an intervention. That my kids, some who are here today, and I can't wait to see you. I love you. They intervened. They're like, "Miss, you've got to go." And when I considered leaving, really considered, every teacher, when you walk away from a classroom, there's this grieving process that, I mean, as much as I hate being up late at night doing lesson plans or whatever, I also love being up late at night putting together those PowerPoints and making sure they're just as cute as possible for class the next day. And that was just the love. That was the love I got to pour into my service. Like, and so it was a gift every morning when I show up to see my kids. But the last year in the classroom at the school I was at, we had maybe 15 Black educators. And when I say educators, I mean classroom instructors, folks on the yard, our counselors, social workers, librarian. We had 15 Black educators. In one school year, 3 Black educators died. Neither from COVID. The first one, and I'm going to say their names because they're ancestors now. And I want to uplift them right now. But Quentin Summers, he was a longtime educator, was a founding member of the high school I was at, and met the kids at the gate every morning, and got them off the bus and got them situated and made sure the kids were safe walking home in downtown Los Angeles. In our fall semester, fall break, he goes home and it's sudden heart attack. We come back to school and we don't have a moment to grieve as a community, individually, as folks who've worked with him for over a decade. No one has a moment to pause. We're told to get back in the classroom and get to work. We get to spring break And there is a educator on our campus. He's a long-term sub. Whole lot of subs on campus right now. And he's one who was there all the time, every day, another artist. And so he always subbed my class when I was out doing battle on behalf of the union. And spring break comes around, he goes home, and it's sudden. Aneurysm. We come back to work. We don't have a moment to breathe, to mourn, to grieve. The last month of school, I take a few days off because an in-law of mine passed and I needed to be with family. I come back and at the time I was teaching a technical design, a theater tech design class. And in that class, it just so happened that it was primarily students with special needs, several students who were on the spectrum and several students who were nonverbal. I had amazing one-on-one aides in that class. One of them, Mr. Williams, Larry Williams, we're the same age. He was studying at Long Beach City College to become an EMT. And he had been working with young men who were on the spectrum and also were nonverbal. One kiddo in my class, his name was Dash. Larry was his aide. And I get back from this family funeral, and a student walks up to my desk and says, "Miss, Mr. Williams won't be here today." And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. And I kept preparing for class. He goes, "No, Mr. Williams will never come back." And it took me a second. And sometimes, I have to say, I understand that you might have thought, that joke was funny. He's like, "Miss, I would never joke about this. Dash's aide will not be here today, and he will never come back, and he is dead." And I was like, "You're lying. You're lying. Like, I can't right now. Like, I'm going to walk outside, and I'm just going to pretend like you didn't say anything you just said." Because I didn't know how to deal with it. The kids weren't in the room yet, and then bell rings. Kids start filing in. The other aides come in, and I see Dash walk into the classroom. He's been crying, and he doesn't speak usually. But he does. He had a habit of, like, we knew his happy noises in class. And so usually he would come in, and it was apt that his name was Dash, because he legit just would dash like across the room back and forth. And so his classmates were used to it, and we knew what his happy sounds were. We knew when he was trying to communicate something. And, we always just worked with that. But this morning he came in, and there were no happy sounds. And he had a substitute aide with him, and the aide is trying to force him to sit down. And Dash refuses to touch the chair. He won't sit down. He won't go to his spot, and he won't make a noise, and he's just shaking his head. And then I realized Jesus wasn't lying. Mr. Williams is gone, and Dash knows it. And in that moment, I got so angry, I was ready to fight the sub aide, because he had started to raise his voice at Dash. And the whole class sees that Dash is not okay. And I was not myself in that moment. And it was very inappropriate how I handled it. But I was like, "Bro, talk to him like that one more time. My man, we're going outside. Like, don't touch him. Don't talk to him. Move." Like, just let him be. And halfway through the class, I couldn't teach the lesson. And I'm like, if I'm feeling this way, what are the kids going through right now? Why are we at school right now? The entire school year, this was the question every morning. Why are we in this fucking building right now? When our kids are suffering, our families are suffering. It is not safe to be here. And I couldn't shake it. He was gunned down after work. on his way to just do his thing, live his life. Such a great young guy, and would have been, all I kept thinking about was the impact he would have continued to have as a black man in our neighborhood serving students with special needs. And I couldn't do it anymore. That was when I decided I'm done. Because I don't want to die. I thought I did at the beginning of the school year. I definitely thought I did. I was ready because I was tired of the warfare. And in that moment, I was clear. I don't want to die. I have an 8-year-old that I've got to take care of. And I need to make it home every day. But if I stay as an educator, the thing I've always wanted to do with my life, I don't know that I'll see my daughter make 18. And so I left. And it's been both a difficult process, but also when folks are asking, how's your transition going? It's mad stressful and overwhelming, but also so much joy. That hope that you're talking about, just being able to literally reimagine everything. Fuck the fuckery. No, we don't have to run ourselves into the ground. No, I don't have to make urgency or budgets or timelines or whatever the fuck the priority. I'm the priority. You're the priority. Our space is the priority. Our relationship is the priority. And nothing else fucking matters. And if I can tend to us, to our space, if I get to just care for the folks in our space, then I have to hope or believe that the transformation we want to see outside of our organizations will eventually happen. But it starts here first, and in the way that I choose to lead and love on the folks that I get to work with.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you for sharing that story. That was very generous of you. And I think that it's actually a very wonderful bridge into the next question, right? So the first question is kind of, what is your diagnosis of today, right? The next question is, how did we get here, in a way, right? So the next question would be, how might you situate then your current work in relation to longer histories of political mobilizations? What genealogies of thought or movement politics are you building off of or see yourself working in relation to, right? To Estella's point about the ongoing impact, right? How do we find continuance? And how have we found continuance through the work that you're doing? So I'm gonna start with Dylan again. Take it away.
So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to ask us the question of what we mean by political mobilization. Because I think part of the challenge we face in our different forms of activity, whether it's art, whether it's mobilization, some of us are involved in forms of grassroots mobilization for electoral politics, which I want to talk about. I think we fail to actually develop an analysis of what we mean by political mobilization. And here's the problem that I've both witnessed and participated in over and over again, is that political mobilization ends up being a form of event organizing, you know, like moving towards some kind of spectacle which you then execute and accomplish. So what I've been obsessed with for many years in the different forms of political community and cultural and artistic community and study community that I'm part of is to try to understand and critically challenge the ways in which our political imagination gets limited, gets kind of cut off from jump because we don't think about what we mean when we say political mobilization. And the main objective, and I have a very narrow skill set, y'all. You know what I mean? So like I feel like I need to like really weaponize that skill set so it affects as much shit as possible. Right? And I encourage y'all to do the same. I mean, I'm trying to build my skill set every day, you know, I am. But at the same time, I know my limitations and I try to make sure that whatever skill set I have, I can utilize that to try to impact the people I'm around and who I care about, who I love, who I'm doing work with. So what I've come to recognize as the primary object of challenge is what I would call militant liberalism. I think it permeates this room, and I'm not outside of it. So I'm not on a soapbox right now. I'm saying it permeates everything we do. And what I mean by liberalism in the case of what we're talking about here is the tendency to rely on the state or existing institutions to solve the problems and to address the violence that the state and those institutions create. Right? So militant liberalism means a couple collectives that I've participated in. I've tried to challenge this, with varying levels of success. Militant liberalism means that if you're dealing with a community or a family or an extended group of loved ones that is handling the aftermath of somebody who, say, has been killed by police, right? There's a militancy in response to that. It's driven by mourning, by grief, by feeling, by rage, all of which are righteous things. I'm all for revenge sometimes, like unlike a lot of abolitionists, I'm all right with a certain kind of revenge. I'm not like, I have a disagreement with certain abolitionists around that. I think revenge can be a healthy thing. But the problem, I think, is when that militancy gets filtered into liberal solutions. The liberal solutions being things like, oh, let's prosecute the cops that killed my cousin, right? Or let's push the state of California to pass a policy to ban the chokehold that killed Angelo Quinto over there in Antioch, right? And the thing is that we don't study that shit, right? We don't look at how all those liberal solutions, even when successful, not only do they do nothing, I'm using the example of police killings, right? Not only do they do nothing to address police violence generally, but in many cases, police killings actually accelerate and increase in the aftermath of these successful liberal reforms. So we need to be critical about where the militancy is coming from, what direction it's going. We need to be careful about what it means to be pushing, for example, for inclusion of LGBTQ plus people in particular institutions when the point is queer liberation. Right? There's a real difference there between inclusion and liberation. We need to rethink about what it means to try to run more people for political office when the point is really reparation, decolonization, and land back, of which there are thriving movements which would benefit from more of our organizations and people throwing in with, even if we're uncomfortable with it, even if it might rub up against some of our funders and foundations. You know what I mean? So having said that, I think the challenge is to expose all the forms of militant liberalism that we are attached to start to think about being adjoined to other traditions, other political, cultural, artistic traditions that think about political horizons differently, think about solutions differently, and are already doing those solutions, already thinking and acting out those horizons. I'll give you one more example, which is the Strike MoMA movement. It's a collective of artists and museum workers based really in New York, but are global. And they've really rocked my world because what they've done is they've exposed how it is that the institution of art museums are a crystallization of the long half-millennial history of racial chattel, of colonization, and of this thing called philanthropy, to which many of us are tied, philanthropy, right, foundations. And what they've said is, fuck that. You know what I mean? Like MoMA itself, the Museum of Modern Art, one of the most high-profile, art institutions in the world, it's actually got to go. Inclusion of our art in your museum is actually the problem. It's not even an insufficient solution, it's the problem. Y'all actually have to go. Right? And then they trace the whole lineage of slaveholders, of colonizers, et cetera, that have made the museum what it is and have supported it and so forth. So I borrow from that, and I'm inspired by that tradition. These are folks who they're art practitioners. They're creating new venues to exhibit art. They're creating new ways to support themselves, financially and otherwise. So I think in addition to redoing how we do the work of community, I think we need to assess how it is that the solutions that we are tied to and that we militantly organize around are liberal solutions, which actually means we're recreating the problem. And so the traditions that I'm with, and that I'm in community, with all the time, are various traditions that run the range of diasporic Black radicalism in the abolitionist tradition. I'm thinking about decolonization, anti-colonial movements of various kinds among various peoples. Indigenous, Aboriginal, First Nations, and otherwise. And I'm also thinking about all the different ways that folks challenge the structures of racial capitalism to rethink how it is that economy works, how sustenance works, and how safety works. So I'm working with those traditions all the time. and the last thing I'll say, I think we need to have much more time devoted to collective study. As far as thinking about we think too much about political mobilization and we don't think about collective study as a crucial foundational form of political mobilization. So rethink what we mean by political mobilization. When you do the work of collective study, I'm thinking the example, one thing I'm really happy to participate in, something called a social justice portal organized by the Scholars for Social Justice. It's like a couple dozen of us that gather every 3 or 4 months, and we devote our attention for 3 hours on a specific concept, right? Whether it's neoliberalism, whether it's colonialism, whether it's racial capitalism, and we study it together, we debate it out together, we have a couple of us kind of talk about it, have expertise in that area. All of us can do this. Hit me up on email. If I can be of service to you, I'll do it. We can do it on Zoom. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not political education in the traditional sense, it's collective study. You know, I think that is a form of political mobilization. We don't do that enough, and when we don't, we fall into the liberal trap. So I'm going to say that over and over again. There's other forms of work I could talk about, but I think this form of collective study is really critical to challenging the liberalism that we're attached to in terms of how we think about our mobilization, our solutions.
Yeah. I'm going to hand it to Kavita.
Sorry, can you hear me? Oh, perfect. Oh, God, this work is so personal. You know, it's so, so deeply personal. And I feel like that's a theme that's been coming up in the course of this conversation. So for the South Asian community, something that we've been able to do really well is transplant all of the fucked up politics that were in South Asia and bring it straight to America. It's been fantastic, y'all. So the British did this fantastic thing of categorization based on religion, caste, class, regional identity, language spoken to divide and conquer. And I will tell you, I still feel it today in the work that I do in New York City in 2022. This is 2022, right? Yeah, okay. Sorry, thank you. I get it confused. But it is so real in our community. And that lives so abundantly along with the ongoing desire within our community to aspire toward whiteness. And for example, the greatest amount of economic inequity of any immigrant community is within the South Asian diaspora in the United States. So we represent the richest of the rich and those who are experiencing the greatest forms of poverty in America. The Fortune 500 list, 10% of those CEOs are particularly Indian men, but are of Indian descent. So we see this disparity, and we see those politics play out in the work that we do every day in the community. And so when we think about how to unlearn that legacy, to unpack that legacy, we can't necessarily look within. We have to look without. We have to constantly be thinking and criticizing and critiquing about what our community is continuing to uphold because we're continuing to fail it. And it's only now that the movement is starting to change and self-reflect. But it's taken a long time to get here. So the South Asian American feminist movement started about 4 decades ago. And when it started, it was really very much of a homogenous component of the community. Highly upper caste, primarily Hindu, primarily individuals of wealth who wanted to think that they were doing good. They weren't coming with a radical mindset to really shift the community, to really think about gender-based violence. In fact, in the language of gender-based violence, they were marginalizing other survivors, right? Even the language of survivors was not used, right? It was a cis hetero woman. We have to unlearn that and unpack all of that. How do we do that? We have to learn from people like Angela Davis. We have to learn from people like Bell Hooks. We have to learn from people like Gayatri Spivak to really make us look from within and say to ourselves, you know, what are we doing wrong in our community? How are we perpetuating forms of harm? And how can we show up for our community that's better? And that's where the movement is headed. So, like, as much as I want to say that we are in a really bleak space right now, And I cannot emphasize that enough. Where the movement is headed, there is actually a lot of hope because we are doing a lot of self-reflection. There is a lot of language of change. And I'm grateful to SOAR for actually changing a lot of that, which is the national umbrella to all the South Asian survivor organizations. To use the language of survivorship, to use the language to self-reflect and say, we've been perpetuating harm. We have been not representing all castes within our community, all classes within our community, the LGBTQIA plus within our community, all survivors within our community, all forms of individuals who have experienced harm have been neglected by this movement, and we need to stop it because that was bad behavior that we perpetuated from our experience in South Asia, and it has to stop, and that is stopping. So that form of hope is there, and I feel it, and it's real. I was just texting with the ED this morning. I was like, you know, it's amazing that we are shifting culture. And that's the essence of what we need to do, right? Like, it is just a few people who can ultimately shift culture. One of the things I wish I had heard earlier on in my career was like, don't wait to be anointed or appointed to make those decisions to shift culture. Like, you can do it now, right? It's the mobilization of people. It is the mobilization of power. For me, it is the mobilization of survivors. I think survivors are the most powerful individuals I know, and I want to channel that power and center their experiences for something better. The last thing I'll say is I think the GBV movement needs to hold itself accountable of how it is inflicting harm through the state, particularly around, you know, how it's perpetuated the carceral system. That work needs to happen. It's an ongoing, necessary conversation within the movement. It's a complex one. There is no clean solution. There are many debates that are happening. What is carceral feminism? What is abolitionist feminism? What is the answer? What is the solution? What can healing look like outside of the prison system, relying on the prison system for survivors of gender-based violence? You know, because asking a survivor to send their member of their family to prison because they've experienced harm should not be the only choice. And that's what we keep perpetuating. So I think that's also where we are in the movement. So it's actually a really exciting time in the midst of all of this pain. I have to hold on to that.
And then Estella, please take it away.
So again, I thought I knew what I wanted to say, and listening to the both of them again, I'm just like, dang. So I like to say I'm an aspiring abolitionist for a lot of the reasons they've just said. I don't know that I'm there yet, but I want to be. Thank you. I appreciate that, Dylan. Yeah, I'm working towards it. A few things stood out to me, and so one about this neoliberal man, that fuckery is real all across K-12 education. I mean, the pandemic hit and mofos was coming out the woodwork talking about, I got the solution. No, you don't. No, you don't. Stop it. And our districts were blowing money left and right, buying up the solution. But one thing that comes to mind in regards to community being a verb, and I often have conversations with students about solidarity also being a verb, and us being in a constant process of asking ourselves, how do we show up in space with one another and like do right by each other, no matter what communities we come from? But how do I make sure that I'm alongside you doing right by you all the time, not sometimes, not, you know, when it doesn't hurt my interest too much, but no, I need to be able to show up, be alongside you, and always make sure that I'm doing my best for you and the community I serve directly. And so a few things are just back and forth in my head. There's this AAPI umbrella term that we are all lumped under. And in my position now, I serve specifically Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander folks in diaspora. That's who EPIC serves. Um, and I've noticed as an educator, there over the last year, there's been a lot of like anti-CRT, this, that, and the other. Oh my God, they're teaching kids truth, ban them all. And there's been a constant uphill battle for ethnic studies, and this idea of like us upholding all the wrong things that are causing harm to our communities long run. There's a lot of it happening in this fight for ethnic studies. And over the last year, a few laws have been passed in a couple of cities and states, and uh, for Asian American studies. And if you look very closely at some of those resolutions or the language for those laws, they're not about ethnic studies. It's not about teaching kids truth. Someone has shopped their solution, their very neoliberal solution, and it somehow made its way to that state's legislature. And now it is law. The problem is that mainstream media will say this was a win for AAPI folks. Absolutely not. It was a win for a single person who managed to be at the right tables in the right rooms at the right time to get that law passed, right? It did not serve Asian American students across the state or the country. It definitely did not serve Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students. But they continue to do their work at the expense of the rest of our folks under this umbrella term. Now, the umbrella term, we've been talking about data disaggregation for a really long time. And finally, some headway is being made. And now I'm like, but do we need the umbrella terms? Because we're missing a whole lot of folks in a whole lot of other communities whenever we say AAPI. And it's not just Pacific Islanders who get left out of different conversations. And then we haven't even talked about what that means for our folks who are mixed, like myself, or folks who identify as queer. It just, there's like, it piles on the injustice and the discrimination, and the battles that we're up against in every single day. But the neoliberal impact on education and the way that educators have had to literally do battle on a day-to-day in our school site council meetings, in our board meetings, and just to be able to say words. I mean, the censorship is real. I can't even imagine that this is where public school education would have ever gone. We've got states where we can't say gay. Like, we've got places where I can't say anti-racist in the classroom. I can't say white supremacy in the classroom. I can't, like, it boggles my mind. And then I just think the generations of impact that does for students of color, for Native Hawaiian, for PI students who will never, not going some wood somewhere, but like would never see themselves reflected in their classroom, in their studies at all. They have to wait until, fingers crossed, they get to a 4-year institution where there is a real ethnic studies program where they get to engage in these conversations and feel fully reflected in their studies. And that sucks. Like, I don't want young folks to have to wait that long to be able to see themselves, to feel whole. I mean, that's what I had to do. It wasn't until second year Africana Studies major I came across Audre Lorde, and first thing I read of her said, "I am Black woman, mother, warrior, poet, coming to do my work and asking if you're doing your work too." And I was like, "God damn, Lord, why you reading me like that?" Like, and but second year Black Studies major, like, that's a very long time to go without feeling whole, without feeling seen, without feeling like I belong, without feeling like there was even a path to liberation, right? And now as a mother, I mean, everything I'm questioning, all of it. Like, my kid is the one in kindergarten who's like, Columbus did what? Actually, like, because we're having these conversations at dinner almost every night. You know, she's organizing protests, and third grade, she got the whole third grade and second grade signed up in a union that she started. Um, so, you know, and I want what I want, and every time, you know, I was raised, kids don't speak unless they're spoken to. You sit, be quiet, you know, you do your chores, and that's it. Respect your elders, and respect your elders translated to don't talk. And sometimes I want to default to that, and I have to keep saying in my head, I'm parenting for liberation, I'm parenting for liberation, I'm parenting for liberation, because she has to be this person 20 years from now. She has to be. And if I don't let her say what she needs to say and be who she needs to be now, she will have to go through the things that I went through. The so-called imposter syndrome, the trying to find my footing, the holding my tongue in spaces because I don't want to be disrespectful, because I can't be the aggressive Black woman, because I'm so much in my head, I cannot say what I need to say freely. And is that I think is incumbent on every educator, on every parent, and every community leader. We won't get past the fog, the fuckery, the neoliberal warfare, that, like, until young folks are fully allowed to just be. I don't believe I empower any young person, because that power is already there. Right? Like, I don't have no magic gift or power. That it's already there. We just have spent a really long time stifling it and snuffing it out, when in fact we just need to get the fuck out the way and let young people do young people shit, do what they want to do, how they want to do, when they want to do. Get out of the way and let them do them.
That's a perfect transition into the last question. So what I'm going to do, because of time, I'm going to combine the last two questions into one. So we talked a little bit about our present moment, talked a little bit about how we got here, and Estella's comments really lead us to the last question about the future, right? What do you see as the possibilities and or limitations of the, you know, the ways in which the platforms in which you're part of, the work that you're already part of and committed to? What needs reimagining? Right? How do we go from here? We have around 10 minutes to finish this off, so I'm going to hand it to Dylan.
So I want to just be in continuity with what Estella was talking about, get out the way. I want to look at the example of what's happening in Palestine right now. I don't know how many folks here are paying attention to that, but it's not hard to get in touch with it very quickly. But in Palestine right now, young people are leading a new phase of struggle against the Israeli genocidal apartheid state. They're engaged in a form of militant, multifaceted guerrilla warfare against the Israeli genocidal apartheid state. It is unapologetically armed. It is unapologetically multidimensional. It is unapologetically about mutual aid and solidarity building at a global scale. And it is also unapologetically about martyrdom. So I think that there's a need to really be in touch with that and to honor that and to find ways to be in continuity with that in whatever small and significant ways that our own political work can reimagine what we're doing in alignment or in some kind of echoing of that model. So I want to say, when we say get out the way, it also means get in touch. You know, it means honor. It means you know, rethink what we really mean by solidarity. That it's both symbolic, but it's also about action. It's about, you know, models of activity. It's about organizing structures. As far as the limitations of institutions go, I will say the university will never lead a struggle. The nonprofit industrial complex should never lead a struggle, even though that's what it aspires to do all the damn time, right? That's what your funders tell you to do. They tell you to come up with limited campaigns that will then shape the political horizon of what the rest of the world thinks. Go ahead and play with that, do your whole mafia organized crime thing with that, but don't buy it, don't drink that Kool-Aid, because that will destroy, that's what destroys movements, right? The nonprofit industrial complex was literally created to destroy movements, to destroy radical and revolutionary movements. That's literally what its origins are in the late 1970s. Read Robert Allen's book, Black Awakening in Capitalist America. It's a real-time chronicling of the founding moments of the nonprofit industrial complex. Those lessons last into this next into the last half century, into the next half century. We all need to be on that. And I'm saying for university-based and K through 12-based people as well. So the limitations of those institutions to me are overt and obvious, but I did want to just end my comments by talking about how I think we need to come in a very critical way after the struggle that's been couched as the struggle against anti-Asian hate, that's been kind of really monetized by some colleagues in this area called hashtag Stop AAPI Hate. I think that there's some real damage that's happened in the sense of political imagination and organizing by couching what is actually state violence, what is actually part of a long history of anti-Asian racism, as hate. Think about all the work it does, all the forms of disciplining and limitation it does, to have these major institutions, I'm talking millions and millions of dollars that have been put into this effort to couch all of those problems under the rubric of hate. Well, I think we should all know at this point that what that does is it induces a militantly liberal dependence on the state to solve the fucking problem, right? What does it mean to call that spectrum of violence against Asian and Asian-descended people hate, right? Or hate crime. Well, now you're calling on the FBI, you're calling on the police, you're calling on the criminal justice system. You think that shit's gonna solve your problem? You think the FBI, the cops, and the criminal justice system are gonna stop elders from getting attacked on the street? So to rethink this stuff as part of what is embedded in the totality of domestic war that is the United States means we have to rethink what happens when there are particular historical moments that crystallize in these surges of anti-Asian racism, right? Gendered anti-Asian violence, right? Which again, it's asymmetrical. It's not everybody gets targeted, right? Sex workers get targeted, elders get targeted, poor people, working people get targeted. Then we also need to understand the totality of the violence itself. You know, I mean, it's about being displaced. It's about how it is that particular institutions will gentrify places and force people into positions of extreme vulnerability. It's about, you know, how the state deals with refugee positions and refugee populations. So I think in terms of the limitations of institutions, we need to think about the rhetoric and the frameworks that we get pulled into all the time. I want to say this is the place where that needs to happen. This is the group of folks where that needs to happen. I'm talking about challenging the Stop AAPI Hate, challenging the Stop Anti-Asian Hate paradigm. If we don't do that, then we're actually complicit, directly complicit in the problem of coloniality, of anti-blackness, and of the carceral state, as we've mentioned it. So that's what I wanted to leave you with, and I'm with you on that, by the way. I'm your partner in that. I'm your collaborator in that, right? I'm ready to do that work with you. So I want to give myself to you in that, in embracing that challenge of coming after this paradigm that I think is really destructive in a bad way right now. Let's be destructive in the right way.
There's this almost romanticization of pain within communities that I really felt through what Dylan, you were saying. You know, when I think about like the institutions that really hold us back, and when even when Seki was started almost 35 years ago, it had two components: one around worker mobilization, and one around the mobilization of survivors, right? And you can see through a level of comfort, you know, sort of what ended up progressing. And the work around worker mobilization really fell. When I think about like what our limitations are for the future, it is ultimately the concentration of wealth that is going to hold us back. And until we effectively mobilize power, we will not be able to respond to that concentration of wealth. That it is continuing to exacerbate, that we have had more economic disparity in our country than we have ever seen. And how can we essentially address that system? There will be some sort of revolution in this country of some sorts. And it's an opportunity for us to be able to address the vast inequity. You know, the fact that children in our cities cannot have clean drinking water still, right? Like the fact that we are still plagued by the same things that were plaguing us, 100 years ago. Where's the progress? It is actually just getting worse for many people. And it continues to get worse because of the inequity that continues to build. And so like when I think about the limitations in front of us, it is really centered around the fact that we cannot move forward without coming together, without mobilizing, without engaging in some form of action. And I would say the last piece is that, we have to be intentional about self reflection because movements can't get stronger until we self reflect. And one of the things that's been on my mind a lot this has been what the 5-year anniversary of Me Too going viral. Like, it's not actually in the dominant discourse anymore. Like nobody is talking about this. It was a moment for some people. It's considered a moment, not for my personal view, but for some people it was considered a moment. And also, there's no critique of how it perpetuated the carceral state and its relationship to the carceral state. It also gave us the language of healing, right? So it's like it's complicated, right? There's no binary here. It offered a lot, but within the dominant discourse, where are we today? We're in a post-Roe state, 5 years after Me Too. What culture change has happened? What shift has happened, right? And so we have to self-reflect. What is effective and what is ineffective? What is working, what is not working? And we have to pivot. We have to move quickly. We have to organize, and we have to use our voices.
Um, it's very easy, from a place of privilege, and I'm speaking for myself, to say we need to reimagine everything. Something a colleague said recently, and I don't remember if we were in a staff meeting or at another conference, but she said that we're privileged to do the work we do all day long for a full-time, like as a full-time job. And it struck me because that never even dawned to me, like as a privilege. But I was like, hell yeah, because as a teacher, I'm doing all the extra stuff on the weekends, in my nights, and now I'm in a position of privilege where it is my full-time job to advocate on behalf of and to be of service. That's like a real blessing that I didn't know was going to come as a perk of this job. So I say that to say it's easy to want to prescribe the solution or something, where we go from here, next steps. I think the reflection part is huge. And two other things that come to mind is I think we need to share those reflections out loud. Like, it's cool to sit in your head and journal, which I do, but you've got to share those out loud. You've got to have the courage to be vulnerable and say, this is what I used to think might have been flawed, and this is where I am now, or this is where I hope to be, and be in those community study sessions, those kinds of conversations that Dylan alluded to. And then something Audrey taught me. She says the last stanza of Litany for Survival, she says that we are afraid to speak because we're afraid that our words will not be heard. But even when we're silent, we're still afraid. And so it's better to speak knowing we were never actually meant to survive. And so that, which is scripture for me, I just keep coming back to. I've got to find the courage to say what I need to say, to be who I was supposed to be, pre-colonial bullshit, who my ancestors wanted me to be. I've got to continue striving to be that person so that Kasima, my daughter, is able to really be the bridge past, present, and future. I like to believe I'm that, but I also have had in the last couple of years to fully accept that I may never see fruits of my labor. And I've got to be okay with that because it's not about me and it's not for me right now. It's actually for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 generations to come. And if we don't do better, and Dr. Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And if we are saying that everyone in this room, to some extent, we know better, well, goddamn it, it's time to do better. Like we have to. We owe it to our great grandchildren. Like we have to. And so I guess that's where I'm at, and that's listening to my colleagues on this panel. I've got a whole lot more thoughts in my brain swirling around. I was trying to like type them down before I lost them all. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, everyone, for this really, really generative panel. I've learned so much. I have pages and pages of notes. But thank you all for being in community and being in this conversation. And that concludes our panel. Round of applause, everyone, please.